Welcome again here in the Red Theatre. In this session, we will be exploring how changing social norms can unlock the UAE's potential. Social norms, that is, unwritten social rules, play a huge role in shaping human behavior. Behavioral scientists therefore often engage themselves with questions like, how do social norms spread? How can existing norms be challenged? And how can new positive norms be brought about? To help shed light on these questions and to understand how social norms can help unlock the UAE's full potential, we have Professor Nikiforakis, who is the co-director of Center for Behavioural and Institutional Design here at NYU Abu Dhabi. In his session, he will share insights from his work on overconsumption research in the UAE. This will touch on his expertise in understanding overconsumption norms in energy behaviors, food choice, water use, and the purchasing of luxury goods. Please join me in welcoming Professor Nikos.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished leaders, esteemed colleagues, honored guests, good afternoon. It is a real privilege to join you at BX 2025, an event that captures the very best that behavioral science has to offer: insights, innovation, and impact. We're gathered here because we share a conviction that understanding human behavior is not a luxury. It's a necessity for building better policies, designing better institutions, and creating more just societies. Today, I have to share with you not just scientific insights, but also questions and perhaps even a few challenges. Of course, no greater challenge for a behavioral scientist than having to compete against beverages outside after a very short lunch. So the challenges will be about how societies change, how norms shape that change, and how we can guide wisely that change. I want to speak to what I believe is one of the greatest oversights in policy making today globally. Too often, policy focuses on what is codified: laws, regulations, formal structures. However, much of human behavior, what really drives communities and nations, is actually shaped by something which is far more subtle and quite often much more powerful: social norms. So this morning, or afternoon I should say at this point, I'll explain what social norms are, how they emerge, and why understanding and monitoring them is essential if societies are to unlock their full social and economic potential. And I'll explain why this work is especially urgent here, for a country as young, as dynamic, and as ambitious as the United Arab Emirates. Social norms are everywhere, even if we rarely stop to notice them. They shape nearly every part of our lives, from how we dress and how we behave in public, to what it means to be on time in different countries, how we raise our children to behave, and how we talk or don't talk about mental health. Like laws, norms set limits to our freedoms. Unlike laws, however, norms are not debated on. They are not voted on. They are not enacted. They emerge quietly, invisibly, from forces that are often rooted at a distant time, sometimes even a distant place. And yet they govern us here today. They shape what we aspire to do. They shape who we aspire to be, what we fear, what we hide. In fact, some scholars believe that norms on occasion are even more powerful than laws. The reason is simple. Norms shape our behavior even when no one is watching. People often comply not out of fear of a fine, but because they have internalized social values about respecting others. Norms legitimize laws. A law, no matter how carefully constructed, is only as strong as the consensus that supports it. Where that consensus is missing, laws are ignored or resisted, such as the case of smoking laws that were introduced a few years ago. Norms reach places that legislation can't easily access, inside our homes, inside our communities, and onto the farthest corners of our communities. They govern the spaces that government can't easily go to. And when norms are violated, the cost can be swift and severe. No penalty, no trial, but something far deeper. Social exclusion, loss of personal trust, permanent reputational damage. We have a word for this today. It's called cancellation. Now, if we want to understand and reflect on the real power of norms, we need only look at the way we communicate online. On social media, we see hate speech, we see sensationalism, exhibitionism, and fake news. Behaviors that in our good old physical world all would be met with disapproval, shame, and perhaps sanctions. So what can policy do? Before we can answer this question, we must clarify what we mean when we say norms. So, Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom had a simple definition. She said, norms are shared understandings about actions that are obligatory, permitted, or forbidden. Shared understandings. So the deep question here is, how do these shared understandings emerge? Not all norms are the same. Different kinds of norms emerge depending on the driving forces behind them, and I think it's very interesting for policymakers to understand what these forces are. We have coordination norms, like how we dress, how we greet each other, and here the driving force is simple: the need to coordinate our actions with others. So people may stick to the norm by dressing in one way in the UAE, and when they take a flight and they go to Europe, they may have no problem dressing in a completely different way. We have cooperative norms like not littering, not lying, not cheating. Here the force comes from social incentives to do what's good for the broader community. We have informational norms, like parenting styles or the best way to lose weight. The driving force here is the search for the best way forward when we're sure about the best action. And finally, we have competitive norms, like luxury lifestyles, lavish weddings, or the exhibitionism I spoke about before that we see on social media. Here the force is personal, the drive to stand out, the need to be noticed, to rise above the crowd. But no matter how the norms emerge, they all have one thing in common. They all create a pressure to conform to what others are doing. And this is very important because depending on the norm, they can push our societies forward or they can hold us back. And this is what I'd like to talk about next. So, We have socially beneficial norms. These are norms that align the personal with the social interest. Think about queuing to avoid chaos, or not littering in public spaces, and keeping noise levels down out of respect for others. These are all examples of norms that encourage us to act not just for ourselves, but for the common good. Alas, not all norms are socially beneficial. Some norms prescribe actions that are socially harmful. Sometimes it is difficult to know when a norm has turned harmful. Other times, the harm is clear to everyone. So let me give you two examples, both rooted in ancient practices, both found across different societies, both carrying significant socioeconomic costs. First, I'd like to speak briefly about female genital mutilation, or FGM, a difficult term, but the one used by the World Health Organization and United Nations to reflect the seriousness of the practice. It's an ancient practice, more than 2,000 years old, and today it persists in about 30 countries, primarily in Africa, but also in parts of Southeast Asia and parts of the Middle East. In many of these countries, FGM is now illegal, and for good reason, because it carries devastating health, psychological, and economic costs. But FGM persists because it is rooted in ancient social norms, norms about purity. Second, skin bleaching. Skin bleaching refers to the use of chemicals to permanently alter one's skin tone. It is driven by social norms that associate lighter skin with beauty, status, and success. Today, skin bleaching has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world. But it comes at a price: serious health risks, including cancer, and the reinforcement of harmful social and racial hierarchies that lead to discrimination and huge economic inefficiencies. Skin bleaching is a classic example of a competitive norm, a norm where individuals harm themselves in a race to outshine others. And so the question emerges: how do norms turn harmful? How can societies, sometimes even over centuries, develop unwritten rules that coerce individuals into behavior that harms not just themselves, but people around them? There are two main reasons why norms become harmful. The first has to do with changes in social values. Sometimes new information emerges, sometimes migration or cultural exchange shifts what people value, what they believe. FGM is one example. What previously believed was necessary, after people realized the serious health risks it posed on their daughters, they started changing their minds and start to consider it wrong. The second reason is different. It happens when societies offer social rewards for behaviors that at a deeper level carry real costs. Skin bleaching falls into that category. Individuals who bleach their skins may be admired. They may have better job opportunities, better salaries, a wider range of marriage prospects. But those private rewards come at a cost of reinforcing inequality and serious health risks. Diagnosing why a norm has become harmful is very important for people who do policy, because the solution depends on the cause. So if the issue is changing social values, policy should focus on coordinating expectations and perhaps offering incentives to those who lead the way forward. But if the reason is misplaced admiration, then policy must work to shift what society celebrates. Now, this may sound like a Herculean task, but it need not be, and I want to give you a real-world example of how this looks like. The Salima campaign was launched 15 years ago by UNICEF to combat FGM. Salima promotes a simple but powerful idea. Girls are Salima, whole, untouched. The campaign tries, therefore, to redefine what it means to be pure. Salima shifted the conversation, celebrating natural girlhood and the dignity of families who chose to protect their daughters. And it's working. FGM rates are dropping. And today, a majority of people, including men, say they would prefer not to perform FGM on their daughters. But here's the challenge, if the fonts are big enough. Even though private values have changed, behavior is lagging behind. Most families still comply to the old norm, not because they believe in it, but because they fear it and what would happen to their daughters if they don't go through with the procedure. In other words, this is not just a values problem. This is a coordination problem. Now, in a study that we published a few years ago, we showed that socially harmful norms can persist even if everyone knows that they're harmful. The reason is because it is costly to be among the first people who will deviate from the norm. So in this study, we also identify intervention that can facilitate coordination of expectations, such as public opinion polls. Now, skin bleaching, the competitive norm. At a first glance, one might think the solution is simple. Ban harmful products, regulate advertising. And while those steps matter, the issue runs much deeper. For generations, the image of a white Jesus surrounded by all white saints in Africa shaped ideas about beauty, goodness, and worth. When lighter skin is portrayed not just as beautiful, but virtuous, it's no surprise that the norm endures. This example reminds us of something important. Role models matter. Who we celebrate, who we elevate, plays a powerful role in transmitting values across generations. Now, of course, neither social values nor social rewards, they're easy to see just by looking around. I look at you and I don't know whether you agree with me or maybe you have some questions. So, if we want to truly understand norms, we need science. We need data. So I would like to conclude by sharing a research partnership between the Center for Behavioral Institutional Design and the Behavioral Science Group. Our goal was simple, but I also think it was very important: to diagnose the causes of overconsumption in the United Arab Emirates. What is overconsumption? Overconsumption is the tendency to consume resources, services, or goods beyond levels that are either necessary or sustainable. And it matters because overconsumption can have major socioeconomic costs. We know that it can strain individuals financially, it can create stress and anxiety, and for society, it can create huge opportunity cost, money that could be placed towards investments, education, towards the future. But seeing luxury consumption around us, on its own, it doesn't tell us that there is a problem with overconsumption. People may be able to afford those purchases. People may enjoy them. So the real question is again deeper. Do people truly choose freely what to consume? Or is there a harmful norm at work, one that quietly pressures individuals to consume more than they want, more than they need? I should stress that overconsumption is not unique to the UAE. It is a global phenomenon, especially in countries that are fast-growing and dynamic. And I would like to emphasize that what makes the UAE stand out on this matter is the willingness to study these questions seriously, to understand not just what people consume, but why, and how policy can support individuals in making choices that are good for their well-being and the well-being of society. So to understand the causes of overconsumption, we turn to data. We designed one of the first large-scale studies aimed not just at what people consume, but how they feel about it, what they believe others expect of them, and whether they feel trapped by these expectations. We carried out the largest behavioral study in the UAE, combining qualitative insights, quantitative analysis, and a general population sample that cuts across age groups, income levels, and all Emirates in the UAE. I won't have time to walk you through all the details today. A full white paper will be available shortly and a scientific study a little bit later. But I do want to share with you a few of the key findings. First, nearly everyone in our study agrees that excessive consumption, sorry, the slides here is a little bit off. So nearly everyone agrees that excessive consumption has negative consequences. And we don't see difference between Emirati and expatriate households. And yet, most households report having problems with excessive consumption. There is a small difference. A majority, actually, of Emirati households report experiencing problems. Maybe this is creating shared understandings. So, here's a quote by a focus group participant who's a UAE national. She said, "I find it impossible to curb luxury purchases, though I wish I could. Every month, the moment my salary is credited, I find myself going shopping." So this pattern suggests that a norm is at play, a competitive norm rooted in how society ascribes special standing to high net worth individuals. But the story doesn't end there. We also find important differences between UAE nationals and expatriates. Again, I don't have time to go into the details, but the lesson is clear. One-size-fits-all policy or policy transplant are unlikely to succeed at curbing overconsumption. So what about social values? If you have seen regression coefficient plots before, you can immediately see that this is telling you something important. But you most likely haven't, so I'll explain. So here what you see is that people who believe that luxury is socially rewarded are much more likely to report problems with overconsumption. But people who believe that education is socially rewarded are far less likely to fall into that trap. And these aren't just opinions, they aren't survey responses. These are incentivized beliefs. We actually paid individuals for the accuracy of their guesses of how many people in the UAE truly value and reward luxury and education. So what this means is that educational attainment emerges as a powerful alternative value to wealth accumulation. If you look, you'll see also that beliefs about generosity also have a mitigating effect on excessive consumption. On the other hand, at the bottom, you see that financial illiteracy does not predict overconsumption. And that makes sense because excessive consumption is not, it seems, a financial choice. It's a social norm. So even if we were able to shift social values, if we were able to change them for values about education and generosity, we would still have to deal with a problem of coordination, as we saw with the Salima campaign. And the question then we have to ask ourselves is, how hard is this problem? So at CIBID, the Center of Behavioral Institutional Design, we developed a new method to measure just how severe that coordination problem really is. It's a method that can provide powerful insights about who to target and how. It's a method that we applied to this study for the first time outside academic circles. Now, the method itself is quite technical, so I won't go in it, but the findings are clear. The coordination problem is substantial. Addressing it will require more than just awareness campaigns. It will require real changes in incentives. So, in conclusion, why should policymakers care about social norms? Because norms are powerful. Because they are unwritten rules that shape our lives. They're not debated on, not voted on, not formally enacted, and yet they are often just as powerful, if not more so, than the laws that we pass. Because norms can promote cooperation, but they can also lock in harmful behaviors, if unchecked. And this work is especially urgent here in the UAE, a young, dynamic nation, a society evolving at breathtaking speed with high levels of migration, a society where traditional collectivist values are now intersecting and sometimes even competing with modern individualistic ones. And while the UAE's achievements are remarkable, it's a young nation. The infrastructure for social scientific research is still young by global standards. There's relatively little scientific research about the values and beliefs of this constantly changing population. So, investing in understanding norms, studying them, diagnosing them, guiding them wisely will be essential. Essential if we really want to unlock the potential of this truly remarkable country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nikos, for that insightful presentation. It's been inspiring to hear about the potential social norms interventions hold for policymaking here in the UAE.